While we're waiting for the rest of our attendees to join us, I'm going to get things kicked off. So my name is Shane. I'm the events manager at 10 Capital Network, and we have a great event for you today on how to hire with Kurt from HireBetter. He's also a part of BK's Capital, so we'll hear a little bit more about that as well. If you have any questions during our session, please use the chat box, which I'm going to enable in just a second here, and we'll get to those when we can. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to our CEO, Hall Martin, to get Kurt introduced.
Thank you, Shane, and I want to thank everybody for joining us today. We have a great presentation from Kurt Wilkin of HireBetter. I've known Kurt for a long time and have been hearing of his success in the hiring space, and asked him to come on and share his experience with others, because I know a lot of people out there are in the process of recruiting new people for their companies, and just wanted to get the latest on what are the best practices for that. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and pass it over to Kurt and have him tell us a little bit about HireBetter and how he works and what we should learn about hiring employees. Kurt, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Hall, thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to share a little slide deck there with you guys. Have to look at my ugly mug there for a bit. What I've found, Hall, is, as you know, it's always about the people. I know cash is king, but if you have all the money in the world and you have a crappy team, you're soon going to be out of money and you're going to be out of business. So, but a great team, on the other hand, a great team can scale. A great team can pivot when things are bad. A great team can overcome a global pandemic or a pending recession. So I like to talk about what great people can do. And even today, as we're sitting here in February 23, we have the conversations I have most every day is about talent. And it goes something like this: Kurt, if I just had more people, if I had better people, if I had a better team, I could kick ass. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. As Hall said, my name is Kurt Wilkin. I'm a co-founder of HireBetter, also a managing partner at BK Capital. At BK, we work with, we've invested in companies like Tecovas and Open Lending, which are really, really successful. But we also invested in some really shitty companies like Home Plate Peanut Butter and Intelligent Surveillance Corporation, which was a complete shit show, as Hall knows very well. And I've also built and sold several companies myself. So I know talent, and I know, especially in this entrepreneurial world, what talent looks like. In fact, I wrote a book called Who's Your Mike that we'll talk about a little bit today, which the subtitle is A No Bullshit Guide to the People You'll Meet on Your Entrepreneurial Journey. So share a few things there. So we're going to cover a fair amount, and I'd like to invite questions. I want this to be very open. But the three main things we're going to cover is, first of all, as an entrepreneur who is trying to scale a company, you are not alone. We all make mistakes. We all have challenges. We all have people challenges. You're not alone. The second is, I want to tell stories of other people's challenges. I think that I learn personally, I think most entrepreneurs learn from our own mistakes. We also learn from stories of others. How did someone else deal with a challenging situation? Don't give me a textbook or a business book I'm going to put on my nightstand and never read. Give me some real life stories. The third thing we're going to do is we're going to tell you, provide some take home concepts. So you guys can take home today some things to think about when you're trying to build your team. And as I said, we all learn from each other. So I would invite questions as we go. All right. So first of all, as I said, you are not alone. We all make hiring mistakes. We all have people on our team who now have inflated titles that are probably beyond their capabilities. We all have tendencies to be very reactive when it comes to hiring. So we're not as strategic as we probably should be. And we all have, and I'm speaking generally, of course, but I'm also looking in the mirror when I say this, we all have emotional pieces that often inhibit our abilities to make strong analytical decisions. So just realize, as founders especially, we have part of what drives us is that emotional quotient, and we get emotional about our employees and tends to make mistakes. So what I like to frame up here is the concept that who got you here? If you're a company, an entrepreneur that's trying to scale a business, who got you here is not necessarily who's going to get you there. And this is a tough concept for folks, because as an entrepreneurial company, as you're really a scrappy startup, you need generalists. You need people who will roll up their sleeves and do whatever it takes to make your company successful. That's great until it's not. There's a time when you need to start looking at next level talent to start growing and scaling your business. I'm not exactly sure where you guys are today. Some of you are probably still in that scrappy startup phase. We can talk about that. And some of you are really trying to go from, 500,000, $1 million to 5 or 10, $20 million. That's really where you need to take a look at where you are. So I encourage our clients, all companies, all entrepreneurs, instead of running off and going to hire the next CFO or VP of product or whatever you think you need, or maybe your advisor thinks you might need, let's take a step back. What are we trying to accomplish as an organization? Where are we going? We might have a revenue goal in mind, or maybe we're just trying to get by every day. I'd like us to look out 3 to 5 years. What are we trying to build? We're $2 or $3 million now. We're trying to get to 20 or 30 million. Okay, well, how are we going to get there? Maybe you're going to launch a new product. You're going to expand your existing footprint. You're going to buy a competitor. I'm not really sure. But the answers to those questions really help us frame up what we need. So then I like to ask companies and entrepreneurs, what does that future state structure, a future state org chart need to look like? Again, the people who got you here are probably not going to get you to that next level. So then the next thing is the toughest part for entrepreneurs, and that is assessing your existing team. In a minute, I'll go through a few examples, but I am very, very confident that you've got members of your team that you've probably outgrown, and we need to assess who those might be and who might not be able to make it to that next level. So one key piece of take-home advice I'm going to give you is the 4 questions I'm about to give you. So if you have your iPhone handy, or maybe a piece of paper and a pencil, take these 4 questions down. They're not rocket science, and they're not anything I necessarily created. I've amalgamated them from people like Vern Harnish and Gino Wickman and, thought leaders in the space. But here are the 4 questions when I'm trying to assess my existing team. Number 1, knowing today what I know about this employee and where the company is going, would I enthusiastically rehire them for the same role? Enthusiastically rehire for the same role. So pretend you've got somebody in the CFO role, and you're looking out with, what am I trying to accomplish as I continue to grow? Would I enthusiastically rehire them? So that's a good question. Number 2 is, does this person have the skills, the tools, and the experience to get me to the next level? Meaning they might not even have the capabilities to get me there. But if we ask that question, it helps us understand what their capabilities are. And even if you provide them with a coach or a mentor or whatever, does that individual have the capability? The 3rd and 4th questions are more what I call gut questions. So things that aren't really, for me as an entrepreneur, they make a lot of sense. And maybe for you as an entrepreneur, make sense. If you're a scientist, you're going to say, oh, that's bullshit, Kurt. But the first question of these are, what if this employee, I'll use Hall as an example. What if Hall came into your office and quit tomorrow? How would you feel? Your initial reaction would be, well, I don't know I don't like change. I don't want to have to go find somebody to replace Hall. But longer term, you might be better off without that employee on your team. And the 4th question is, what if you had an entire team made out of Halls? If everybody was a Hall, how chaotic would it be? Sometimes these employees we're questioning are really full of drama, and you know that in your gut that the person is not a long haul employee for you. So I like those 4 questions. Those are really good to assess your existing team. None of them are going to give you the answer, but they're going to tell you which direction you think you might need to go. And I guess that's another point I want to make is no one can tell you what to do when it comes to a challenging employee. It's really your decision at the end of the day. So you guys came on here thinking you were going to talk about hiring, and we haven't even talked about hiring yet. We've talked about all the things that need to go in to the process before you start hiring. So I want to really impress that upon you as well, that we haven't even gotten to the recruiting part. We really need to make sure we know where we're going as an organization. All right. So I talked a little bit about employees you might have outgrown. I want to give you a couple of examples. And these are stories that are real. I've gotten, they're out of my book actually. And I've given, the book has a number of archetypes of the types of employees you'll meet. The first one is Mike. The book's called Who's Your Mike? So the question is, well, Kurt, who the hell is Mike? And so let me tell you the story of Mike, and then we'll go through a couple of other, what I call legacy employees that you're going to probably run across during your entrepreneurial days. So Mike. In my example, Mike is your fraternity brother. He's your best friend. You guys are best buds. Doesn't have to be. Maybe he or she was one of your first employees and was always right there with you nights and weekends, helping you with all the, administrative things that you needed to get done. He taught himself QuickBooks. He taught himself how to be a bookkeeper. He taught himself how to, set up an LLC, set up your bank account, all the stuff that's not related to your product or your service or sales. And it's a necessary role. Somebody has to do it. And Mike took it on and loved it, right? And he's good at it and you suck at it. But over time, as your company grows and becomes a $1, $2, $5, $10, $15 million company, Mike is still busting his hump, but now you start promoting him to reward his 100-hour work weeks. So he becomes your accountant, then your controller, and maybe someday, eventually, he probably becomes your CFO because titles are cheap and you give him that title. But now Mike is in over his head. He's still working 100 hours a week, but he doesn't have a team. He didn't know how to build a team. And he's trying to negotiate a big line of credit with your bank and, maybe maybe a merger agreement, something beyond his capacity. He's overwhelmed. He's in over his head. He doesn't know what to do. The question is, who's your Mike? Every entrepreneur either has a Mike, has had a Mike, or will have a Mike. It's kind of like death and taxes, right? Everybody's going to have a Mike. And it could be finance and accounting like my Mike is, or it could be sales, marketing, operations, whatever it is. Someone's going to have a loyal, dedicated employee that you outgrow. So the question is, what do you do with Mike? And we'll get to that here in a second. Let me preface all this with what it says there on the slide. The best way to avoid having a Mike, just don't grow. If you don't grow, you're not going to have employees that you outgrow. So if you're trying to save yourself the emotional baggage of no Mikes, just don't grow. So I've got a couple of other legacy employee examples that I want to go through, and they all have fun names. The first one is called Bounce Around Betty. Betty is kind of your do-all generalist. She does everything, and she's able to solve whatever problem you have. And every startup needs a Betty. Absolutely. You got a problem in marketing, Betty will go solve it, go stick her in there, and she'll stabilize the troops. You need a help with a production facility in Mexico. She'll be on the next plane down there helping them through it, which is a real life example, by the way. You need help with, you got a big, maybe an audit, maybe Walmart needs to come and audit your facility to make sure you're compliant. So she stands there and makes sure everything works properly. She's good at solving stuff, and you bounce around to wherever there's holes, but she's not going to build your next level customer service team. She's not going to build your next level sales organization. So Betty is great. And she didn't need to leave, but she might not be your VP of operations or COO or whatever title she may want. The third example is, I call him Harry the Hustler. Harry is, many of us have had a Harry in our past. He's the guy that really can sell anything you've got. He probably was right by your side as you're, building your company and figures out how to sell. And so, a couple of years later, you're doing 2 million in revenue and he's got 1.5 million of it in his bucket, right? But as you really need to scale, you need to go beyond Harry, right? So the first thing your Vista's chair or your YPO forum tells you need to hire a VP of sales, Kurt. Well, you tell Harry this and Harry says, well, Kurt, I'm your VP of sales. Well, okay, sure, Harry, let's go be your VP of sales. The problem is Harry's a great individual contributor. VP of sales needs to, among other things at this level, build out a sales process, build out the sales deck and collateral, material, systems, all the stuff that you need to scale. He also needs to hire and build a team. He needs to hold people accountable with goals and metrics. He needs to go through call reports. He needs to go through your CRM, and it's all the crap that Harry probably hates doing. So what often happens is now Harry's been promoted to a VP of sales. A year later, he's struggling immensely. He's no longer doing what he's really good at, which is just individual selling. So now you've not only lost your best salesperson, but now you've got a really shitty sales manager. So another example of a legacy employee that you guys will probably face if you grow. So we can dive into all those characters and what do we do with them a bit. Let me go one more slide here. And let's talk about the hiring process, because that's what you guys, I think, were here for in the beginning. And so now you've determined that Harry's not your guy. You need to hire a VP of sales. You need to hire a CFO, whatever that case may be. So let's think about what we need to do in order to do that. Well, spoiler alert, it's not just go build a job description and go if you really want to do it right. So let's take a look at the macroeconomic environment right now. And we hear about this great resignation, we hear about quiet quitting, hear about all these other things. And what I'll tell you is before you go hire people willy-nilly, let's take a look internally at what our company looks like. What I mean by that is, especially the younger generation, and I'll say even guys like me and Hall are starting to really be introspective and determine what do we want out of life. We don't just want a paycheck. They don't just want a paycheck. And they might not just want equity. Some people do, of course, they're drawn to money and equity. But there's a whole slew of folks that want more meaning and purpose in their lives. And if you really want to build a kick-ass team, you need to have your company stand for more than just a shareholder value. So those words that 10 years ago were soft and fuzzy are now table stakes. Things like culture, mission, vision, your core values, all those things are super important if we really want to build a kick-ass team. All right. So, but skipping ahead, we're going to hire somebody. We need a CFO. What a lot of us do is we go to Google search job description CFO. We go to Hall and say, hey, Hall, do you have a job description for a CFO? We go to, we have a CEO coach who gives us a job description and says, this is what you need. Those are all interesting, but that's someone else's needs, and it might not even be someone else's needs. It's someone else's list. That's not what you need. So I would encourage you, I use the analogy, if you're building a house, you're going to have a blueprint for the type of house you want to build. Let's do the same thing with a job description. Let's really make sure we're building the house with the right set of blueprints. So let's go ask the tough questions. What is this person? What do we expect from them? What do we want them to accomplish? What are the goals? If a year from now, if we're all sitting here fat and happy and thankful that we've got this new hire, what does that person accomplish? So we can dive into that as we get to Q&A. And then the other two things when it comes to hiring is, how should I put this? I was going to say lightly, but I always tell people I'm looking in the mirror when I say this. I'm a glass half full guy. So you come in here for an interview to me, I'm going to like you. I'm going to figure out a way to hire you either because I like you or because I think you're a stray dog that needs a home and I'll do whatever it takes to try to fix you, right? And a lot of entrepreneurs are like that. We have a mentality that we just don't know how to truly screen. So I would encourage you to, if you have that challenge, to partner with somebody who doesn't have that challenge. Maybe it's a mentor or coach. Maybe it's a member of your EO forum, something like that, that knows you, knows the company that you're looking to build and can ask the tough questions of the candidates. The other thing we see a lot is you guys as entrepreneurs, the biggest unlocking move for you is probably going to be an operating partner, somebody that can run the business while you focus on sales and product. And when it's time to make that hire, what many of us do is we have our team. Our team's important to us. We have our team interview that person. And it sounds great. Hey, I want to trust my team. I love my team. I'm going to bring in a new person. The challenge is whoever we bring in to get us to the next level, to scale our business, is probably, really by definition, going to do things differently than you. They're probably going to hold people more accountable than they are right now. And that's super uncomfortable for an entrepreneurial team to get their arms around. So you may scare off or screen out some of your best candidates if you have your team doing the interview with you or for you. So I don't think they can't meet them, but I wouldn't make them part of your true interview process. You're basically asking them to hire their boss who's going to hold them accountable. And that's a tough combo. And the last thing on the interview piece is in the old days, we use things like, monster.com or Indeed, and we still use Indeed, whatnot for candidates. And some roles, people are desperate for a job. So you can bring them in and you can screen the hell out of them. You can treat them like crap or whatever, and you can make a hire. But there's most roles, you're going to have to put a little sales on. So think about that. As you're interviewing and screening them, you also should be selling them. And that comes out and manifests in several ways for us with our candidates. The first and obvious one is your people that are doing the interview and are unprepared. How many times have you seen someone printing a resume off the printer as they're walking into the interview room, right? And have done no preparation for the candidate. So the candidates feel that, and you're not really selling, you're putting on your best foot forward. And then asking them the same damn questions that the last guy asked them. Why do you leave ABC Co? What do you want to do with the next part of your career? So be prepared and realize that people have choices. especially in this environment. If you can make a hire, but I want you to make a great hire. So to make a great hire, you've got to have a bit of salesmanship there as well. So we talked a little bit about, the importance of talent and the importance of capital to your success. One thing that we've put together that's I think super helpful is this quiz. We call it the No Bullshit Team Quiz. Basically at who'syourmic.com/quiz, we have a quiz you can take to see if you think you might have one of those legacy employees that you might be troubled with, and then it gives you some tips on what to do with them. I want to, at this point, Hall, I want to open it up for Q&A. I know we've got a lot of time left, so I hope we have a lot of good interaction. But we can talk about what we can do with Mike other than getting rid of him or other things. We can definitely dive into all that. I'm going to stop sharing so we can see you.
Great. Well, thanks for that, Kurt. And if anybody has a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box. My first question is a little bit different. It's basically, technology has been used for some time in the hiring process. I think for a while, people were using keyword searches of the resume, that type of thing. Now we have things like Chat GPT and AI. What do you think? What is the first question is, what's the role of tech in the hiring process? Where is it appropriate and where is it not?
Well, it's funny. One of our big pitches as an organization at HireBetter is we're human to human because we are humans and we're hiring humans. So we believe that there's definitely a human element at play. Having said that, there is a big room for technology. We use technology to enable us, but we don't use it as a be all end all. Where I have a problem is when you've got tools where you plug in an algorithm and they're going to spit out candidates. I don't think that's the best way to go. I think there has to be a human element there as well. So it's a balance.
Well, that's great. Well, I was once hiring for some distributor positions, and it was pretty much the same. We get 100 resumes. We go through 70 of them would just not meet the criteria we asked for. They didn't live in the country. They didn't speak the language. There was something that was just a showstopper. And then from the 30, we got down to about 10 that we thought were really interesting. And we started calling those people and starting to interview them and so forth. And then we'd bring the top 3 people to the company for hiring. What do you think about a waterfall process like that? Is that the right way to do it, or are there better ways?
Yeah, so it's a great question, Hall. I think many of us get in a hurry and we want to hire as I say, the first pretty girl I meet, I want to marry, right? And that's obviously not the way to go. And some of us are just desperate for talent, so we will hire earlier than we should. I really love the hire slow, fire fast. And on the slide, I had it called HireBetter. In fact, April 1st, you'll see us change our name from HireBetter to FireBetter. But back to your point, hiring takes a lot of work, and it's hard to throw on your people managers to ask them to hire because they've got a full-time job already. So it is a waterfall type of mentality. It's a numbers game. You should, for a key position, you're probably going to look at 100 to 200 people, and you're going to probably talk to 50 or 60 people, and you'll ultimately really get down to, having a stronger interview with, 10 or 15, and ultimately get 2 or 3 on site where you're going to go through the full bore process. So it does take a lot of work, which is, where companies like HireBetter come in. But if you've got, I want all of you to have hiring as a best practice. And if you can make it a best practice, you'll be successful.
Well, my next question is, what's the best way to fire someone if it becomes clear after a while this is not working for whatever reason? What steps do you take to rectify the problem?
Well, I'll start all this off by saying I'm not an HR guy, and most of you are probably less than 50 people in your company, so the rules are a little bit different. But once you get over 50, especially, there's some rules. And I would say that a lot of folks don't work out because we haven't set the proper expectations on the front end. And speaking for myself, again, I tend to throw you into the fire, go figure it out. And some people love that, especially at the early stage of your company. But as you mature and you're trying to attract that next level person, they need to know what their expectations are. What are the goals? And some people, entrepreneurs, aren't really good at giving that that guidance. So make sure that they've been given the right expectations and the right tools to be successful. If that's still not working out, then it's a matter of you might have to manage them out. And if they're not meeting expectations, what most HR people would say is put them on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, for the next 30 to 60 or 90 days. Again, I'm not an HR person. I like to think if it's not working out, it's not working out in your gut, and try to make a decision. Just don't let it fester for too long. because no one ever looked up and said, man, I wish I hadn't fired him when I did. They usually say, I wish I'd fired him, 6 months ago.
What's your take on PIP programs? Do you think they play a valuable role either in trying to give them a second chance, or it's part of the process of moving out?
Well, do you want me to tell you what I do, or would I suggest you do?
I like to hear both. What exactly do you end up doing to make it work?
Honestly, I'm a sissy, and I love people. I want to give them every chance to be successful. However, I found that people take advantage of that, and it doesn't really serve me well. So that's why I'm not a good manager, which is why I have an operator, Cisco, who does all that. But if you're putting somebody on a PIP, the chances of them being successful after that PIP is very, very low. And again, without regard to HR laws, you're probably going to lose that employee one way or the other after the PIP period's over.
Great. Well, I work for a company where they put a really high value on the culture. And one of the issues is you had to fit the culture coming in. And unfortunately, one of the downsides to that is some people would fit the feel-good culture, but they didn't have the skills or the work ethic or something else and so forth. How do you balance out the culture with the rest of the things you need to cover to make that a successful candidate?
Yeah, this question runs a gamut of folks. Some people use some of these psychometrics like predictive index, culture index, and other ones. Some of them are pretty hardcore. If you don't fit a specific profile, you're not even getting a discussion or a second look. I think that's a little far, but they live and breathe by it. And there's they put the cult in culture, so to speak. I think that there's a balance. You need someone who fits your culture. If your culture is we work 24/7 and we're here to serve the clients with whatever they might need, you're not going to work with somebody who doesn't have that same mentality or the same core value. But if they can't do their job, then you're not going to be successful. So it's a balance. I would tell most people culture first, and capabilities second, because you can't teach somebody how to work harder.
Great. Well, Neil brings up a good point in the chat box. It says, always be cautious with PIPs if you are already planning to let them go and just using this as a justification to fire them. It can cause legal liability if you PIP them and then fire them later. It's a part of the plan. Better put them on an informal plan in that scenario. What are the legal issues around this that we need to watch out for? Man,
you're going to get me in so much trouble, Hall, because I'm speaking way out of school here because I'm not a HR professional. Just know that if you get to that point, I would probably call somebody in your HR compliance or HR legal team about that. Especially, again, as you get over 50 employees, there's lots of laws and regulations. Even under 50, there's protected classes. I think it's anybody over 50. I think it's women over 40. I think it's anybody of color, any minority stakeholders. You just have to be super careful. And what I try to do is do the right thing and treat them fairly. And that usually has worked in my career. And the times where I've been all worried about the legal piece and walked somebody out the door hadn't felt good and hadn't been good.
Right. Next question is, what's your opinion of utilizing recruiters? Any particular roles you're hiring that is best suited for outsourcing to recruiters?
So let me give you, first of all, my perspective on recruiters, and then realize I'm in the recruiting industry. I freaking hate recruiters.
Okay.
I think, and I say that obviously tongue in cheek, and my team hates it when I say that, but I think the recruiting industry, as most of us in this entrepreneurial space know, is broken. The reason it's broken is because goals are misaligned. You have recruiters working on a contingent basis, meaning you only pay them if they find a body. Very misaligned with your goals because you want the best available talent. They want whoever they can sell you. And if you bring somebody that's not theirs and they're better than who theirs is, they're going to try to talk you out of it. It's just a screwed up model, right? So I'll start there. We're a little bit different. We're a retained search firm, and we want to be your long-term partner. So we can do a HireBetter pitch later if you want. I think that there are certain hiring, as I said earlier, needs to be a best practice. My desire is for all of you guys to be great at hiring. If you don't have the time, you might have to use recruiters, because we mentioned earlier 100 or 200 people at the top of the funnel. Many of us don't have the time to do that. We want someone to search and get us down to those three, and then we can make a decision. That's probably one area when you just simply don't have the time to make a hire. The other is oftentimes those key strategic hires. If you need a CFO, you've got an internal recruiting team that's working on 100 inside sales folks all the time, they're probably not qualified to do a CFO search, for example. There might be some super technical roles that you have that your team's not qualified for. Maybe they're not so executive level hires, but they're super important, and there's a limited pool, and you just don't have the time or the bandwidth to go do it.
Great. Next one goes back to the culture topic. You have a culture. How do you determine that a candidate fits that culture? What's your criteria for that?
Well, so a couple of things. One is some people do the psychometrics that I mentioned. A couple of them that are out there, the culture index and predictive index. There's other things that what I like to do is a core values exercise. So we have 6 core values at HireBetter. One of them is grit. We want to make sure that you can kind of fight through the friction. And so we might give you an exercise or ask you the question, when have you exhibited grit in your life, and ask them to come back with some good examples. We might give them some take home exercises. We might tell them stories about what we consider grit at HireBetter, and then we ask them to give us their own stories. So different ways we can try to test their grit, if you will, or ask them stories about their career. When have they had to overcome, no many times? Those are just a couple of examples, Hall.
Great. What do you think about office romances? I worked at a company where people freely had office romances, and it was great for 6 months or a year. And then the next 5 years, I had to restructure teams so that they weren't on the same team anymore. And it was a real pain. But what's your take on those?
Man, that's a great question. So Matt, excuse me for being red-faced here for a second. I met my wife at Ernst & Young when we both worked on a project. So at least there we had after that project, we went to different clients and we weren't on the same job anymore. So that was okay. And once we disclosed it, they wouldn't let you work together again. Man, smaller companies, that's tough because especially if it goes bad or they're having a bad day. I'm not sure I have a great answer for you, Hall, other than you might make it a policy that you don't have office romances and one of them has to go. That's probably the one I've seen the most often, and definitely not a reporting relationship. If a manager can't have a romantic relationship with a subordinate, that's absolutely a no-no.
That's a given for sure. Next question is, what do you think of policies such as JP Morgan's of culling the bottom 5% of performers each year? Automatically 5% have to go out the door. What's your thought about that?
Well, I'm not sure I like the number, like just a flat 5 or 10%, but I do think it's a good practice. I think if you look around your organization now, here's where it manifests itself for us, Hall, is we're trying to help a company hire an operating partner, a CEO or CFO or CEO, something like that, but they can't afford it. And I say, look, there's probably enough fat sitting around your team where you can afford it by cutting the bottom, 2 or 3 people on your team to be able to afford this key hire. And I think that's true for most companies. I think there's people that are hanging around that aren't providing much value, and they're probably causing more drama than they are value. And not only is it addition by subtraction in numbers, but also with culture.
Great. Well, I've also worked in companies where, they would let certain people go and they were shrinking. And so it was who's going to get voted off the island this year was always the fear. How do you overcome that in a down market, for example?
Man, super, super timely. What I encourage most entrepreneurs to do, well, first of all, as I said before, cash is king. And you're not going to be able to survive if you just don't have the cash. So many of us have had to face the decision, what's going to happen in Q1, Q2 of 23, and is this going to bounce back? And we're hopeful it's going to bounce back, but at the same time, we need to prepare for it not bouncing back. So I would say if there's a concern that you're in fear that it might not bounce back, cut a little bit more than you think you might, because you can't unwind, you can't get that money back, in other words. Having said that, what we try to encourage folks to do is don't continue to pick the scab. So if you're going to know you need to cut 5 people over the next quarter, cut them now, because if you cut them every couple of weeks, you're going to always have people looking over their shoulder. Oh, is another one coming? Is another one coming? And that's a tough one. You've got to try to cut costs, but at the same time, you want to keep the team that's there, the one that are doing good work, and you want to keep.
My other question is, what's the current standard for severance packages? If somebody's a rank and file employee, not a president, but how how many months of salary do you give them, or what do you do to help them segue out to the next job?
Yeah, this is one that's so individualized, whatever feels good. And again, whatever you can afford. Some people have a set policy. It's maybe a week for every year that you've been employed. Maybe it's 2 weeks minimum. At the end of the day, what most people want is to treat their employees fairly. And they want a, forget the term, Hall, but they want to have it be where they're not going to be sued, right? So you're signing a release. That's it. You're signing a release. So generally it's for rank and file employees, probably 2 to 4 weeks. And you'll have an agreement that your HR or legal team will draft up. And for that, you'll get a release of claims, so you won't be sued down the road.
What about NDAs? I've been hearing some states like California are going to eliminate NDAs. You can't have those anymore. Anybody can go work for anybody that they want. What do you think the role of the NDA is today?
Man, I thought it was non-solicitations or non-competes, but is it NDAs as well?
Well, I guess NDA was part of that, because I work for a company where when people go to the other company, they had knowledge of people's salary, and they say, well, if you offer this salary here, you might do well with that group. And so NDA was, I wasn't really soliciting, but NDA really kind of covered that. But you're right, it's non-solicitation, non-compete.
Yeah. So generally in the non-solicitation, non-compete, I don't begrudge anybody from competing with me. I just don't want them to go after my people or my client. So that's where the non-solicitation comes in. So I'm very adamant about that. The NDA, man, it's, for me, it's an ethical thing. And let me just give you a brief example from my own career. I hired an employee from another firm, and they, after a week or so, openly bragged about the information that they had. And they showed me a binder that they had printed out of their CRM system of all the stuff that they were going to go after on my behalf. And I kind of smiled and nodded. And as soon as she left, I took that book and I shredded it, because I didn't want that. And I'll tell you this, if somebody wants to join my firm and they're going to not treat their former employee well, whether it's giving them enough notice or giving me inside secrets, I don't want you, because I know you're going to do the same damn thing to me. And it's an ethical line for me. So I hope anybody listening doesn't accept those trade secrets from your competitors, because that's bullshit.
Very good. Any other questions? We have time for one more, and then we'll go ahead and move to our pitch for today. I guess the last question I had to do around, again, the technology that's out there. We see AI coming in, and it seemed like it's going to be harder and harder to figure out who's actually providing that information and who's actually just leveraging AI technology to provide that resume or that test question and so forth. What's your take on AI and its impact on the hiring process?
Hall, I know enough not to try to answer something when I don't know the answer. So I'm not going to even pretend to have the good answer for you on AI on that one. There's people a lot smarter than me, and I can find a resource for you, but I don't think I can answer it. But I do want to answer something that I wanted to kind of alluded to earlier. And I want to make sure looks like we have about a minute. I'll try to wrap this up. What do I do with Mike? What do I do with Betty? What do I do with Harry? My first piece of advice for folks is they don't have to go. Doesn't mean they're a bad employee that they need to go. It means that you need to assess them. So let's say we keep Mike. Maybe he can be moved into an individual contributor role as opposed to being your CFO. Maybe you can get him a coach to help him become the CFO that you need. Maybe you talk to him and say, look, I need to move faster than you're able to move. So I'm going to bring in a CFO from the outside. I'm going to make you controller, but I'm going to tell them part of their job description is to coach you to be a CFO for your next role, whether it's for us or another company. So lots of different things you can do that are very humanized and very good for you and the employee, but take care of the team. That's your higher priority.
Well, great. Well, we're at the end of our time now. We have one more question, but we'll put you in contact with them and have you answer that question afterwards. But thanks so much, Kurt, for joining us today, and appreciate your insights on the hiring process. It was really great.
Awesome. Thanks, all.
And with that, let's go and move over to Be Generous. We have Dominique and Neil St. Clair here today with us. Thank you guys for joining us, and looking forward to your presentation on Be Generous.
Great. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having us again. My name is Dominic. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Be Generous. And we have built a very unique proprietary type of technology that's really hit some great recent traction in the, we are a financial technology company operating in the philanthropy space, which is a $500 billion a year market. So I'm sure everybody has heard of buy now, pay later companies before, like Affirm, Klarna, and Afterpay. We have built the first ever philanthropic credit product, which instead of allowing somebody to buy now, pay later, allows somebody to donate now and pay later. Most people are surprised to learn that the philanthropic industry in the United States is a $500 billion a year market with, sorry, my thing cut out, a $500 billion a year market with 241 million Americans donating to charities. The philanthropic sector holds about 1/10 of the American workforce, and there's 1.7 million nonprofits in the United States holding $4 trillion worth of assets. So it is a very, very big industry. And yet, unlike the e-commerce vertical, the nonprofit market has no credit or lending products. And so we built something very unique here. So I'll go through a quick overview here. As I said, Be Generous is a fintech company that's created the world's first philanthropic credit product. Our product is an embeddable credit product, which allows donors to make a donation to a nonprofit by financing it over time without paying any money at the point of donation. The donor gets the full tax deduction right away for the full donation. The nonprofit receives all of the money up front, the entire donation, but the donor doesn't pay any money out of pocket. And instead, the donor pays this donation later over 3, 6, or 9 months completely for free. No interest payments, no transaction fees, no hidden fees, and no late fees. We've raised a $10.5 million venture capital round led by some of the most notable investors in Silicon Valley and the United States. Some of our notable investors include the CEO of PayPal, Dan Schulman, the co-founder of Affirm, Hui Lin, and the chairwoman of FICO, Joanna Reese. In addition, we've raised from venture capitalists as well, including ATX Ventures, one of the leading VCs out of Austin, 116 Street Ventures out of New York, Lifeline Ventures from Los Angeles, Canaan from Menlo Park, San Francisco Bay Area, Higher Ground Labs, Transcend Ventures, RSLP Ventures, and most recently, Gangels just invested. We've also signed partnerships with 2 of the leading online donation management platforms in the world, one being Blackbaud. Blackbaud is the largest nonprofit or largest software company in the world powering nonprofits. To give you a sense of how big they are, they've processed $100 billion of donations through their platform. They are enormous. They're a publicly traded company. In fact, the president of Blackbaud invested in our company, and you can see a quote from him right here. He said, "Donate now, pay later is going to become a must-have option on every donation page across the nonprofit world." Jay Odell. He introduced us to the rest of his team at Blackbaud. We ended up signing a partnership with them, and we'll be integrating into some of their online donation platforms, which will put us on thousands of websites. We also recently signed a partnership with The Giving Block, one of the largest online donation platforms in the US. They recently got acquired by Shift4, the payment processing company, for $300 million. And so we're going to be integrating into Shift4 this year, actually. And by the end of Q3, we should be on an additional 3,000 nonprofit websites as a result of that partnership, which is pretty exciting. So where are we at today? Well, in the last quarter, we've signed up just about 100 nonprofits, including some of the nation's biggest nonprofits like PETA, the Jewish Federation, Boy Scouts, March On, National Military Family Association, National Down Syndrome Society, Humane Society, and others. So we've signed up almost one nonprofit every day since we've been live in the market. And we've seen a huge uptick in donors using the product. So in the last 90 days, we have approved about $1.2 million of credit to donors, processed just under $300,000 of loan applications. And most importantly, the average online donation last year in the United States was only $128. The average donate now, pay later donation is $460. So literally 260% larger, or put it another way, donors who use our product to make a donation donate 3.5 times the size of a normal online donation, which is pretty exciting. We have a massive first market mover advantage. We do not have any competitors other than the traditional credit card, which is obviously charging 20% APR, and 67% of donors are unwilling to put a donation on a credit card because of the interest payments and late fees. Nobody else is doing what we're doing. We have a very strong first mover advantage and strong IP protection. And lastly, we have raised a credit and lending facility from Drake Bank, which is our bank partner. And that allows us to lend $250 million or $250 million over the next 3 years in order to power these loans. So here are some of the KPIs I talked about a moment ago. You can see on the right-hand side, our applications are up over 1,000% in just the last 90 days. And we have a 0% default and 0% delinquency rate. So we have an excellent credit box, which is working very well for us. So how does it actually work? Well, we embed a donate now, pay later button on a nonprofit's website. In this example, you're looking at the Red Cross. The embedding process takes about an hour. It's very quick. No technology or CTO is necessarily required. We can do it very easily. The button sits normally next to their normal donate button. And this time you can see it's next to their one-time donation button. An individual comes to the Red Cross's website to make a donation as they would ordinarily do. Let's say this person decides I want to donate $1,000. We run this donor through an instant soft credit check with our partnership with TransUnion. We run them through Ekata and SoCure in order to verify their identity. Excuse me. And that allows us basically to render a credit decision. So what we do is we take all this information and we put it into something called Proveneer, which is our decision engine. And in this whole process, everything I've talked about takes about 2 seconds on average. So it's virtually instant. Donors are not even aware of the complexity of what's going on the back end. And none of this has any effect on the donor's credit score. I want to just reiterate that. This does not affect the donor's credit score. So in about 2 seconds, Proveneer will render a decision. What you're seeing here is an approved decision. And this donor can then decide how they wish to pay off this $1,000 donation. They want to pay it in 3 months, 6 months, or 12 months. So hypothetically, let's say they pick the 12-month option. What ends up happening is the Red Cross will receive $1,000 right now in the donor's name. The donor will receive a $1,000 tax deduction right now, but the donor won't spend any money out of pocket. And in 30 days from now, the first payment of $83 will be due from the donor, and then will be auto-deducted for 11 months after that. There are no interest fees, no transaction fees, no late fees, and no hidden fees. This is completely free for the donor. So it's essentially like effectively taking a donation and putting it onto an installment plan while the nonprofit gets the money up front and the donor gets the full tax deduction. And that's what you'll see on this next slide here. So what does our product fundamentally do? What are the benefits of our product in 4 instances? Very clearly. First, our product solves the time value of money problem. It is a major hedge against inflation for nonprofits. What I mean by that is money in a nonprofit's bank account now is worth more than it is dripped in over time when it can be eroded by 6 to 8% inflation. And nonprofits need liquidity because half of all nonprofits have less than 1 month of cash on hand. So getting money in their account now is much more valuable than it is dripped in over time. 2, one of the biggest problems in the nonprofit space today are things called pledge defaults or monthly donor cancellations. So a lot of nonprofits deal with pledge defaults where a donor says, hey, I can't donate this $1,000 now, but come back to me in 6 months and you can collect the $1,000 from me then. We actually recently had one of our bigger clients, is a big cancer nonprofit, tell us that that was the biggest problem they're dealing with, which is people dropping off when they go to collect these pledges. Well, she said to us, if we use Donate Now, Pay Later, we would never have to deal with that problem again, because instead of taking a pledge, we could just tell this donor, just use Donate Now, Pay Later. We'll get the $1,000 today. You'll get the $1,000 tax deduction for the tax benefits, and you won't have to pay any money today. And then you can just pay it off in 9 small installments, basically. Third, we increase the average donation of a contribution by 3.5 times or 260%, which is obviously a huge value to nonprofits. And lastly, our product attracts new donors to the nonprofit that would not or could not have donated before. I mentioned this slide a moment ago, the increase in the donation size. Here's an op-ed in Cranes, New York. We'll send her on the deck if anyone wants to read that. It's an op-ed about why our product has worked so well for some of our clients. Our clients are actually quoted in the article. Here's a visual representation about the growth of our product over the last 90 days. Our loan applications are up 438%, and our loan amount requests are up over 1,173%. So these are actually results from our first quarter in the market. Here's a visual representation of some of our nonprofit customers. You can see some of the biggest nonprofits in the nation are here, like PETA, the Jewish Federation, National Down Syndrome Society, and Jewish Federation, Boy Scouts, and many others. This is actually my favorite slide on the presentation. Oftentimes we get asked, how do you assess product market fit? And that's sort of the golden question for early to mid-stage tech. And one of the ways that we use is something called the Sean Ellis product market fit test. So Sean Ellis is the former chief marketing officer of Dropbox, and he created a product market fit test where he said, if you poll your users and you ask them, would you be disappointed if you could no longer use our product? If over 40% of respondents say yes, they would be disappointed. In his opinion, you have achieved product market fit. So we did exactly this. We took our users, nonprofits and donors both, and we asked them exactly that question. Would you be disappointed if you could no longer use Donate Now, Pay Later? 96% of our nonprofit clients said yes, which is just as good as you could possibly hope for. We only had one that didn't say yes. So 96% of our clients said they would be disappointed if they could no longer use our product, which was incredibly thrilling to hear from us. And then we asked donors, would you be disappointed if you could no longer use Donate Now Pay Later? And 76% said they would be disappointed, which was also incredibly thrilling to hear from for us as well. We then asked the question to donors, would you want to use Donate Now Pay Later, or would you use Donate Now Pay Later again to make another donation? And 85% said yes. So these numbers were incredibly strong, which is why this is my favorite slide. Here's our partnership with Blackbaud that I mentioned a moment ago. Blackbaud is the largest software company in the world powering nonprofits, $100 billion of donations they've processed. We signed an integration and revenue partnership with Blackbaud, and we'll be integrating into their Your Cause and Just Giving platforms, and potentially another platform called Luminate. In fact, we had a call today with the American Cancer Society has asked us if we would integrate into Luminate, which is one of Blackbaud's products, in order to offer this to the American Cancer Society by way of Blackbaud. So that's a very exciting partnership to us. And we just signed a partnership with the Giving Block a couple of weeks ago, and this will put us on over 2,000 nonprofits by the end of the year. The Giving Block, as I mentioned, was just purchased by Shift4 for $300 million. They have thousands of clients, and we're going to integrate into the Giving Block and then be turned on approximately 2,000 to 3,000 clients by Q3 of this year. Drake Bank is our primary banker today. This is the facility I mentioned a moment ago. We've signed a credit agreement with them called the Lending Origination and Servicing Agreement that allows us to lend up to $250 million over the next 3-year period through with these Donate Now Pay Later loans that they are financing off of their balance sheet. Here's some recent press. We've been covered in all the major press publications, from American Banker to TechCrunch to Axios, the Nonprofit Times, and many, many more. These are just a snapshot of some of the recent ones. Our business model. So this really just compares us to the e-commerce space, showing that basically in comparison to the e-commerce vertical, we are a similar sized vertical, except unlike the e-commerce space, where 20% of all e-commerce transactions are done using a buy now, pay later loan, 0% of donations today are done using a credit product, obviously other than a credit card, because of the fact that Donate Now Pay Later did not exist until we created it and launched it 3 months ago. The way we make money is we charge a transaction fee on each donation that ranges from 12% to 15%. We then split that fee with Drake Bank, and we take none of the individual risk on the loan losses. So if a donor decides, hey, we're not going to pay this back, the bank actually takes that loss and discharges that loan. I am pleased to report that we have 0% delinquencies today and 0% losses. I expect at some point we will. We're aiming to keep those losses under 3.8%, which was the average loss rate across the buy now, pay later space last year. We think our losses will be under 2%. They're 0 today, but we expect to have some losses. And even though this rate is between 12% and 15% for the nonprofits, the average rate that a nonprofit is paying today is 7.5%, because it is a variable rate. And I can explain our pricing further later on if you'd like, but the average rate that a nonprofit pays on our platform is 7.5%. Here's a financial projection, just talking about what we expect to do next year, excuse me. I can walk you through anyone who's interested. We have a much more detailed model, but I'm happy to walk you through it. This is an interesting slide talking about the exit opportunity in comparison to the buy now, pay later space. So it really just talks about what type of basically lending metrics would we need to hit, underlying sales, total income, and the number of customers and merchants would we need to hit in order to achieve, quote unquote, unicorn status. And interestingly, because the market is so big, we actually need to capture a relatively minuscule percentage of the overall market in order to get significant loan volume, which then triggers a sizable valuation. And so you can actually look at the numbers here and see it's a very, very small percentage of the market that would need to be captured, because the market is $500 billion. Here's an interesting slide showing the recent notable M&A transactions in the nonprofit technology space. People always say to me, we have a great business, we really like it. It's an interesting business. You have great investors, this and that, but is this really a hot space? Is there really M&A action in this space? Here's a great visual representation of just the last 2 years worth of M&A transactions. There are a ton of them. So it's a very hot space, and it does not actually, interestingly, have a lot of competition. These are our employees. Our CTO, Scott Priddy, is the former head of engineering at MasterCard. Before that, head of engineering at Vise and Ally Bank. And then he was a senior architect at PayPal and Visa before that. Dave Marcacci is our head of sales. He's the former global head of sales at Blackbaud, company I told you about. These are some of our notable VC investors. I've mentioned them before, so I won't go through them one by one again. These are our angel investors. That's the CEO of PayPal, the co-founder of Affirm, the chairwoman of FICO, the owner of the Boston Celtics, the chairman of the board of the Boy Scouts, and the chairman of the board of the ASPCA. And our last slide here is the raise. So we are raising a total of $13 million. We've currently raised $10.5 million of that round. So there's $2.5 million that are open today. And we've raised it on a safe note with a 30 million cap. And we're just at the tail end of our raise right now. Thank you very much.
Great, Dominic. Thanks for that pitch. It was right on. A couple of questions came through the chat box. I thought we'd go ahead and kick that off right now. Moat, sounds like all buy now, pay later companies can enter this market in 24 hours. What is the moat here for this deal?
Yeah, there's several moats. But the best answer I can give you is that I sort of wondered this question myself, which is, why is the CEO of PayPal and the co-founder of Affirm, why are they investing in our company if to your point, they can just enter the market themselves? So I actually just asked them. I asked Dan Schulman from PayPal and I asked Hoy Lin from Affirm, hey, you could just do this yourself. Why are you investing in us? And the answer they gave me was that these companies are focused heavily in the e-commerce vertical. They own less than 1 to 2% market share in that vertical. They're doubling and tripling down in that vertical. And they would be, quote, this is the quote they told me, foolish to go into a vertical that they're not set up to lend to because of their bank charter with Cross River Bank, which is the bank that funds all of the loans from Affirm, and that they would not be eligible with their current credit box to lend to donors as well. So they know nothing of, this is not a vertical that they service. This is not a vertical that they want to go into, and that they would, quote, much rather just buy a company like ours if we can achieve growth and product market fit, if they decide later on they want to go into the nonprofit space. So as opposed to trying to compete with us, they said that we would make a nice acquisition target for them, which is the reason that they wanted to invest in the company in the first place. So that's the answer that they've given us. I think another answer would be, not only do we have the direct integration relationships with the nonprofits, that's a huge barrier to entry, right? We actually are embedded in the nonprofit on the nonprofit's website. And we also have the credit facility that's able to do this because we're set up only to lend to banks. And they're also only interest-free bearing loans. So we can't lend on interest-bearing loans, which these companies lend primarily interest-bearing loans as well. So there's some technical specifications and reasons why they can't do it. I'm sure they could do it, but why there's a moat around it. But ultimately, the reason is that they don't want to do it. And look at us.
We have time for one last question here. I may have missed it, but are payments auto-deducted from their bank account or credit card? If card, who pays the transaction fee?
Yes, the payments are auto-deducted from the accounts. We offer debit card, credit card, ACH, or check as the payment methods. And the fees are paid by, the fees are split between the nonprofit and us at Be Generous.
Great. And here's one more question. Did you say safe note? If so, no cap, what is your minimum for the remaining 2.5 million that you'll accept?
Yeah, the minimum is $50,000, and we are raising on a safe note with a 30 million cap.
And where are you guys based?
We're based in Los Angeles, but we also have an office in Austin, Texas, an office in Miami, and some employees in New York City.
Great. Well, we have some investor interest for you. We'll make those introductions afterwards. We're at our time limit. I want to thank everybody, Kurt, for your presentation, Dominique and Neil for your presentation on Be Generous as well. I think it was a great event. With that, we'll go ahead and wrap it up and make introductions afterwards. But appreciate everybody in the audience for asking great questions as well. With that, we'll go and close it out.
Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. Thanks all. Bye-bye.